It was late January of 1973. Across the country, people were mourning the passing of former President Lyndon B. Johnson. His funeral was set to be broadcast on national television, and schools across the U.S. closed for the day so families could watch. In a quiet neighborhood near Dayton, Ohio, that unexpected day off meant a teenage girl was home alone, just for a short while. But during that small window of time, someone entered the house, and what happened next would shatter the sense of safety in the community. She was brutally assaulted and murdered. Just 12 days earlier, another violent crime had taken place not far away, and fear quickly spread around the community. Were these cases connected? Investigators would eventually determine that they were, but the person responsible has never been identified. More than 5 decades have passed, and early DNA testing came up short. But there is still physical evidence, and with that there's hope that with today's technology, the case may finally find resolution. I'm your host Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murder of Linda Sue Dearth. I want to give a heads up before we begin that this episode includes discussion of sexual abuse involving a minor, as well as the killings of young children. While I usually avoid sharing graphic details unless absolutely necessary, in today's cases, some of the crime scene information plays a key role in understanding potential connections or distinctions between them. Because of that, I go into a bit more detail than usual, so please take care when listening and prioritize your well-being. Many years after that fateful day, Odine Dearth could still recall the details of that January morning. Her 13-year-old daughter, Linda Sue, was excited to be able to sleep in and be home from school. She was wearing a long, floor-length nightgown, and their cat kept playfully chasing the bottom of the nightgown around, pouncing at Linda's feet. Odine and her husband, Dwayne, had 3 children. Their oldest son, Maurice, who went by Mo, was studying at Ohio Wesleyan University, so their 2 younger children, Robert, age 17, and Linda, age 13, were still living in the home. To describe Linda, I'll use a direct quote from her parents, who shared this with the webpage for the organization called National Organization of Parents of Murdered Children. It read, quote, "Linda was a wonderful daughter. We could not have asked for anyone so kind, generous, fun-loving, and full of life. Linda loved animals and children. Linda was active in her church group and also in school activities. Linda had just mastered playing the clarinet and was to perform the following day that she was murdered. Linda was also into tap dancing and was into doing ceramics." End quote. In addition to that, Linda's favorite song was "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." And you can't fool me, I know you just stopped for a moment and hummed that in your head. It's stuck in my head now, but it's a catchy little tune, so I don't blame her. She was also in Girl Scouts, and she loved taking on a teaching role. In fact, she used to teach some of the younger kids in Sunday school. Linda was a 7th grader at Northmont Junior High School, and as I mentioned at the top of the episode, schools were closed that day to observe the funeral of former President Lyndon B. Johnson. But the Dearth parents still had to go to work. Dwayne worked at K&F Metal Finishers, Inc., and Odine worked in banking at the Brooksville branch of Farmers Merchants Bank. That left Robert and Linda home that morning. Linda was excited for her clarinet performance the next day, and so she planned to practice for a little while, and otherwise just hang out around the house and take advantage of some downtime. Robert left the home that morning between 9:30 and 9:45 a.m., and said goodbye to his sister. He was running over to his grandmother's house to prune her trees. Their house sat on Diamond Mill Road in Brooksville, Ohio, just northwest of Dayton. It's a small town, and the Dearth's brick ranch sat beside one neighbor and otherwise was just adjacent to farmland, and I'll have a picture of it on the Instagram at SimplerTimeCrimePod. When Robert arrived to his grandmother's house, she said that the trees didn't really need any pruning, so he left and decided to visit a classmate for a while instead. Robert returned home at around 11:30 to 11:45 a.m., but he didn't immediately go in the house. He wanted to work on his truck for a little while in the garage, and so he just jumped right into doing that. As he was finishing up, he got a weird feeling in the pit of his stomach because he noticed the door which led into the kitchen was open, and it shouldn't be. He walked into the house and called Linda's name. I want to quickly preface here that based on estimated time of death and when investigators believe the crime took place, it's thought that Linda was already deceased at this point, but according to news articles that I have linked in the show notes, Robert insists he heard his sister make some sort of noise when he called her name, and he followed that noise into the living room where he stumbled into a disturbing scene. There on the couch was his sister Linda. She was sprawled out, nude, and her face was black and blue. Robert recalled at the time that he thought somebody had beaten her up. He ran next door to the neighbor's house and phoned police as well as his father at work. According to reporting in the Dayton Daily News, Robert said to his father, "Get home, Dad, something's happened to Linda." Caught off guard, he asked his son, "What?" And Robert just said, "Just get home." By the time Dwayne made it home, his house was flooded with investigators and official personnel, and he found out the heartbreaking news. His daughter Linda had been pronounced dead and was still inside the home. Upon hearing the news, Linda's grandmother, Odine's mother, actually passed out on their front lawn. Jim Locke was a longtime police officer and firefighter, and he was a first responder that day. He told the Dayton Daily News that it was one of the most disturbing crime scenes he'd ever walked into at the time, and that it was just so tragic how young she was, and that something so violent could have happened. The little cat that was pouncing around with Linda that morning was not the only pet the family had. They also had a protective and very vocal Dalmatian dog that was said to be a good watchdog. The dog was found locked in the basement of the home, and according to Odine Dearth, the dog had been kicked and had a footprint on its ribs. As a personal side note, when I was growing up, my home was burglarized once. Luckily, nobody was home that day, but my very protective dog was. Our door was locked, and we had left the windows ajar because it got very warm in our house, and we were looking to let the breeze through. Someone removed the screens from the house and climbed in that way, and then left through the front door. Now, our dog, she barked at everything, and we had to be careful with her because she wasn't always the most predictable dog around people she didn't know. But if someone were to come into the house and she was barking and the hair on her back was up, we would pet her and say, "It's okay, Chelsea," and give her a little milk bone as a treat, and she'd usually retreat and calm down as soon as that happened and she saw that we were okay with whoever this person was. The day of our burglary, she was found locked in one of our back bedrooms, and so we always felt the burglar was someone she knew or someone we knew enough that they came with treats and said her name and got her into that back bedroom. I don't know how the Dearth's dog was specifically, but it makes me wonder if the entry into the home was someone the dog knew, and this is purely speculation, but maybe the dog came at the person as he began attacking Linda. Dog people certainly know that even calm dogs can get upset when they see something happening to their owner, and I actually wonder if maybe the dog even bit the killer. And that's when the killer attacked and kicked and stepped on the dog and got the dog into the basement. We of course don't know, but that could be significant because was there anybody around in the neighborhood or anybody who was questioned by the police who's back in those files, going back through all the old police files, who was noted to have a bandage anywhere, on their arm, on their leg, somewhere in the days following? Just a thought. The bruising on Linda's face was not from a beating. It was determined that Linda had been sexually assaulted and shot twice in the head with a small caliber gun, likely a .22 caliber handgun. The sexual assault was kept very quiet by police early on. They didn't release that until later, but I figured I would just tell you up front. No real purpose in bearing the lead on this one, and the reasons for police being cagey about details was way more than just protecting the investigation. You see, I can't tell you the story of Linda Sue Dearth's murder without telling you about another crime. And to do that, I need to back up 12 days and head 15 miles away to the community of Northridge, where a crime took place that would shake the community to its core. On the morning of Saturday, January 13th, 1973, 26-year-old Gloria Buck kissed her husband Jack goodbye. He was leaving for the day to go on a hunting trip with friends. After he left, Gloria spent the morning with her 2 children, Tracy, who was 6, and Scott, who was 5. The Buck family lived on Arthur Avenue, and just 1 block over was 2 babysitters that the family used, the Brown sisters. Patty was 17 and Jennifer was 12. That morning, Jennifer had come over and was playing in the front yard with Tracy and Scott. Gloria had come outside and asked if Jennifer was available to continue watching the children in the front yard while she met with a potential buyer for a TV. Gloria had a classified ad for her TV in the publication The Trade-In Post. But Jennifer told her she was sorry she couldn't. She had to get back home because she was going shopping with her father. So Jennifer departed the Buck family home around 11 a.m. Gloria called Patty Brown a little after 11:30 a.m., and she asked Patty if she was available to come over later that afternoon and watch the children for a little while. Patty told her she couldn't because she actually wasn't feeling well that day. While they were still on the phone, Patty heard Gloria call the kids inside from playing outside. She didn't want them to be outside unsupervised because she knew she had company coming soon, and she wanted them inside when the person came because this was going to take her full attention. According to Patty Brown, a short time later, Gloria said to her, "I have to let you go. Someone's at the door." And she had let Patty know that she was expecting a man to come over around noon that day and look at the TV she was selling. So with that, they said their goodbyes on the phone and hung up. Later that afternoon, around 3 p.m., Jennifer Brown had returned home from her shopping trip, and she wanted to show Gloria her new shoes. So she happily skipped the 1 block over to the Buck residence and knocked at the door. Nobody answered, but she heard the TV on, so she figured they must be home. Jennifer was there all the time and was very comfortable enough that she let herself in. And she walked through the main rooms and didn't see or hear Gloria or the children. So she walked to the first bedroom, and there was nothing. And then she walked to the second, and there was also nothing. But when she reached the final bedroom, she walked into a nightmare. All 3 of them were lying there motionless and covered in blood. Jennifer ran out of the house as fast as she could and sprinted straight to her sister back home and basically said, "Oh my God, the Bucks, they've been killed." But Patty didn't believe her, so she ran over, despite Jennifer's pleas with her to not go in and see what she saw. Patty didn't enter the house, but she went to the window of the bedroom Jennifer told her that they were in, and she saw the same terrible scene as her sister, and she knew she had to get help. The scene in the Bucks' modest home was horrifying. Unlike the rural stretch of road Linda Dearth lived on, the Bucks' home was in a residential neighborhood with a lot of houses nearby. The 2 children were stabbed to death with deep wounds from a large knife. They were stabbed in precise areas, with Tracy having both of her carotid arteries severed in her neck. And the attack on Mrs. Buck was rage-filled, so content warning on what I'm about to tell you. She fought so hard. She had defensive wounds all over her hands. She was found naked with stab wounds all over her body, including her chest, neck, heart, and lungs. Her skull was bashed in, and she was shot in the head with a .22 caliber gun. In fact, it was her family's own gun, and it was missing from the home after the attack. Whoever had done this had also brought their own knife because none from the family home were missing. Jack Buck returned home that evening to flashing lights and police tape around his home. His first thought was that his son was maybe hit by a car while riding his bike, and so he panicked and ran towards the house, but he was stopped before he got there and put in the back of a police car. They then broke the news to him about his family. I can only imagine how he felt at that moment. He normally would have been there that day, but he had gone on the hunting trip. And then he gets home and he has no idea what he's walking into, and in an instant, his whole family, his whole life essentially, was just taken from him. He described his son as talkative and ornery, and his daughter as the sweetest little girl you'd ever meet in your life. And I loved them dearly, he told the paper. Despite the brutality of this crime and the neighborhood panicking, police were quick to downplay the risk to the community. Deputy Inspector Harlan Andrew was in charge of the investigation, and he told people to basically calm down. He said, quote, "Nothing in our investigation would indicate that there is a maniac running amok in the community." Which I disagree with him, because a mother and her 2 small children were just brutally murdered in their own home in the middle of the day. But, okay. Beyond that blasé attitude was a police department feeling immense public pressure to find out who did this. And they were quickly able to rule out Jack Buck, as he had a strong alibi from hunting with friends that day, and they spoke to all of those friends who corroborated that. But rather than dig into the trail of the classified ad, investigators would shock the community when on Monday, January 22nd, they would arrest 17-year-old babysitter Patty Brown and charge her as a juvenile delinquent responsible for all 3 murders. Apparently from the get-go, investigators just felt that she knew too much. That was honestly most of what their initial interrogation was based off of. Police had brought both Patty and Jennifer Brown in for questioning, since they were some of the last people to see and speak to Gloria Buck that day. Even though they were minors, they were questioned alone for hours, and they thought they were just acting as witnesses, but the questioning just continued into an interrogation mode, and they realized they were being interviewed as suspects. They were grilled and interrogated, and eventually 12-year-old Jennifer allegedly told police that her sister said she had killed the family because Gloria owed her babysitting money. And with that statement, Patty was arrested. Her family was shocked. They said they were looking for legal representation, and they absolutely knew that their daughter had nothing to do with this crime. That legal representation wouldn't come for a few more days, and when it did, it was by way of the public defender's office, specifically an attorney named Richard Dodge. Patty Brown would sit in jail for weeks as the case was further investigated and as she awaited her trial in juvenile court. And in the meantime, another crime would occur in nearby Miami County. 24-year-old Joy Simpson and her 2-year-old son Douglas were home alone on Thursday, February 8, 1973. Her twins were off in pre-kindergarten that day. Joy lived on North Sayers Street, which was very similar to the Dearth's home, a pretty rural stretch of road, but North Sayers did have some other homes on it. I'll again share a photo of it on my Instagram. In what might be the most heartbreaking detail out there, it was her young twins that had arrived home off the school bus that afternoon that found their mother and little brother deceased. They were found together in one bedroom. Just as a heads up, this next part gets a little graphic. Joy was partially nude with her hands tied behind her back, and she had been brutally beaten to death. Her son Douglas was fully clothed, but also had been beaten to death and was lying next to her. On the bed, the killer had left the murder weapon behind, a bloodied claw hammer. It was just a horrible case, and honestly, the reporting on this case is so minimal. The first few months after it happened, there was some reporting, especially about the fear people were feeling in the neighborhood, and also its potential connections to the other area cases. But then it really fell off the radar, and I can't find anything on it since the 70s. So if you're local to the area and you know anything else about the outcome of Joy and Douglas's case, please reach out to me. I'd love to do some bonus material on their case and help push the case forward in any way I can. I'm going to try to follow up and get my hands on some additional information as well, but I wasn't able to in time for this recording. As far as comparing this case to the other two cases, it's similar to the murders of the Buck family because it was a mother home with her small child. All three cases occurred in the middle of the day, and all three occurred in a relatively small geographic region. As far as differences, the obvious one is that a hammer was used in this crime. Mrs. Buck was beaten as well, but she sustained stab wounds as well as gunshot wounds from a gun that matched the gun missing from her home. Linda Dearth was the only one with a confirmed sexual assault, at least that's been publicly shared, and she had been shot as well. The only one with a suspect was the Buck family, as they had a teenage girl in custody at this time. But that case would soon fall apart with new evidence. Just wanted to say a quick thank you for checking out my episode this week and for adjusting to me having ads now. My goal is that some of this ad funding will help push forward some of the projects and initiatives I'm hoping to do to expand upon this podcast and all the work I'm doing. So thank you so much for your support and keep sharing the podcast with your friends. Now back to the show. In early May of 1973, Patty Brown had already spent 100 days in jail and was in the thick of preparing for her juvenile court hearing when a new piece of evidence changed everything. Ballistics reports confirmed that the gun used in the commission of Linda Sue Dearth's murder was the same gun that killed Gloria Buck, and it matched the gun that was missing from Gloria Buck's home. Patty Brown was already in police custody 2 days before Linda's murder. The sheriff's department was adamant that they still felt that they had the right person and that Patty Brown could have discarded the weapon and that the same weapon being used didn't mean anything about it being the same perpetrator. But I personally think that sounds ridiculous. The hearing for Patty Brown was closed to the public, but the news traveled fast. On May 7th, 1973, all charges were dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could not be tried for the charges again in the future. Patty had turned 18 years old while sitting in jail, and the investigation had a profound impact on her. Not only did she suffer the trauma of seeing the brutal crime scene of her close friend and family who she babysat for, she then went through sitting in jail for a crime she didn't commit. Even though she was innocent, neighbors acted funny towards her in the future, and she just couldn't resume a normal life. She ended up staying with relatives in Florida. In this case, Patty was a secondary victim of our official criminal justice system. But for those of us in the true crime space, both content creators and consumers, I think it's important to remember the damages that can be done when we name people and put them on trial by the internet or court of public opinion. So it's just a good reminder of that. So after Patty's charges were dismissed, a very public feud ensued between the sheriff and Patty's attorney, Richard Dodge. And probably because of this, we got more information than we typically would because each time one would hurl an accusation, the other would respond with more information to clarify. You see, Richard Dodge had identified who he thought was a viable suspect for the murder of Linda Dearth and the murders of the Buck family. That person was sitting in jail at the time for misdemeanor charges related to making obscene phone calls. As people who listen to true crime cases, you're probably familiar with the fact that obscene phone calls can very much be an indicator that someone is either going to escalate in their behavior or it's part of their existing predatory behavior and part of their full MO. Apparently, in the short time after the Buck family murders, but before her arrest, Patty Brown had been receiving disturbing phone calls. It's never been reported what those phone calls entailed or if it was thought that this suspect, who was in jail for obscene phone calls, if those were the ones to her, if those are connected at all, or if he was making obscene phone calls to somewhere else. So we don't know if they're one and the same, but it is odd, and certainly that's where my brain went. This man has never been named, but according to Richard Dodge, he was 34 years old and worked at a service station near the Buck family home. Richard Dodge turned evidence over to law enforcement that belonged to the man he said it was incriminating. It included a personal essay from this man and magazines and books, as well as personal notes that Dodge had written in conjunction with his team. And here's where a lot of the feud began. Montgomery County Sheriff Bernard Keeter accused Dodge and his team of investigators of obtaining these things unethically, if not illegally. According to him, they tricked this landlady, who was also this man's aunt, into thinking they represented him, and she allowed them entrance where they took items without knowledge. Dodge and his team denied this and said they were very transparent about who they were, and if they had obtained these things illegally, they said, why would we have turned them over to the sheriff's department and told on ourselves? The sheriff's department did verify that they questioned this man early on, but found him to not be involved. Dodge basically said, that's because you had tunnel vision on my client. Dodge went on to say that the sheriff's department had completely botched the investigation, and he called for the resignations of Chief of Detectives Harlan Andrew and other members of his staff. He also accused Prosecutor Lee Falk of acting without integrity in the case. He even went as far as saying that there was a political cover-up and agenda involved. Prosecutor Lee Falk responded by saying to the Dayton Daily News, quote, Dick Dodge is a very emotional person, and this is an example of his emotions running over. We feel that no one on our staff messed up in any way in this case. I was in on the evaluation, and we decided to proceed in the case because we felt there was sufficient evidence to do so. We had the statement from the witness and the statements which Patty Brown herself made, which pointed to her complicity, we thought. End quote. He went on to say that once the secondary witness recanted in her testimony, they felt they no longer had a case against Patty Brown. That witness was Patty Brown's younger sister, Jennifer, and more would come out about how both sisters were interrogated. Without spending too much time on it, what I'll say is that Patty was questioned so long, she broke out in hives and was sobbing. And I do just want to note that she actually had to undergo some competency evaluations during the time between her arrest and her hearing because she had been attending what we would call special ed classes nowadays. And so they were not even sure if she really had the capacity to have represented herself in that interrogation without support. Patty's younger sister, Jennifer, allegedly started her menstrual cycle while she was being interrogated, and it was reported that she was unable to go home and change out of her soiled clothes. They made her stay there. This is something that the sheriff's department denied, but that's something that Jennifer did say happened. Jennifer went on to say that much of her statement was forced or written out for her, and she was just asked to confirm. Again, she was 12 at the time, but there was a lot of back and forth on that. In the midst of all of this, Dodge revealed something else his team had discovered that connected Linda Dearth's case to the Buck family murders. Both families had classified ads for items for sale in that same publication. The Dearths were selling a car, and the Buck family, as you recall, were selling that TV. We also do know that there was a sign on the Dearth's property for the car being for sale, and the car was sitting out front. If the statements made by the Brown sisters are true, Gloria Buck was meeting a potential buyer for her TV that day. Could the perpetrator have used the sale of the car as a way to get Linda Dearth to open the door for him? Linda Sue's case faded away from public view, as did the Buck case, though investigators insisted that they continued to get tips and that they've always continued to investigate both cases. After the murder of his whole family, Jack Buck, a welder, couldn't stand to stay there. He ended up moving away and renting out the home, and in the fall of '73, something bizarre happened. The family who had moved in had never gone into the attic, and it sounded like investigators never did either. According to reporting in the Dayton Daily News, an 8-inch butcher knife was found hidden in the attic when someone finally went up there. The attic was one of those where you access it by pull-down steps, and they had gone up there and found the butcher knife hidden between 2 stacks of storm windows. This part is honestly so bizarre to me. I was spinning on this, and I can't imagine why the killer would make a point to go up in this attic and place the knife there. It's just very odd behavior. This detail reminded me a lot about a serial killer I've discussed in a couple of recent episodes, that of James Mike DeBartolabin. He was a prolific counterfeiter who was investigated by the Secret Service, and once they busted him for his counterfeiting operation, they went through all of his stuff, and they found disturbing sexual things, including a bunch of tape recordings of torturing women. He was extensively investigated, and it was definitely found to be a prolific sexual predator and killer, and law enforcement believes that he's involved in way more than they've ever been able to connect him to, and he was operating all over the country. He was active during this time, but the only thing is, and I'll get into this a little more a while later, I'm going to talk DNA. They have Mike Bartleban's DNA, so I feel like if it was him, we'd know, but I can't say for certain. So put a pin in the DNA talk for a moment because I'll get back to that. The cases stalled for years. In 1987, investigators shared that they were looking for a criminal profile in these cases, and by 1988, they had obtained one, but they didn't share what that profile was. The only information adjacent to this that was released was that they thought the killer may have had a military background and medical background. They don't say why they think that, but investigators early on in both cases just kept talking about how they felt like whoever did this knew what they were doing, and that these were such blitz attacks where the murder was the ultimate goal and carried out efficiently, kind of almost like a hit. The next information in the case wouldn't come out until 1999, when the newest investigators on the cases decided to explore DNA advancements. In May of 1999, the Dayton Daily News published an update on the cases of Linda Sue Dearth and the Buck family murders. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the public was really just learning about DNA, what that meant, and how it could solve cases. And the technology for law enforcement was ever evolving all the time. It still is. And at that time, it was becoming a game changer for cold cases. Now, it's still nowhere near what it is today, but it was promising. Detective Tom Peed would not discuss what evidence they had, but did say that he turned several pieces of evidence over to be tested, and that there was evidence from both crime scenes. He told the paper, quote, "This case would be solved today. That's what makes it so disheartening." Detective Peed hoped that even though the crimes happened 26 years earlier, that he still had a shot. Now, even though he wouldn't reveal the evidence, we do have some idea of what was found at the Buck crime scene thanks to the feud between Montgomery County Sheriff and attorney Richard Dodge from back in '73. Dodge told the Journal-Herald that a man's handkerchief was found at the Buck bedroom. He said Jack Buck said it didn't belong to him, and that an analysis of the secretions on it showed that they were from a person with type B blood, different from either the Bucks or Miss Brown. Other mentions of physical evidence in the Buck case include the holster of the missing gun. The holster was found left on the bed, and it's unclear if they were able to obtain fingerprints from it. It's also unclear what DNA was found at Linda Sue Dearth's crime scene. I wonder if there's a photograph of the footprint on the dog. We know there was a sexual assault, but it's never been mentioned if they recovered physical evidence of the attacker. By December of 1999, they confirmed that in the evidence submitted to the crime lab, technicians were able to extract DNA. In 1999, Detective Peed said he was looking at 4 suspects and hoping to eliminate suspects based on comparative testing. He said that of the 4 suspects, 3 knew at least one of the 2 families. I had to read that like 3 times to understand what they were saying. We don't know what they were able to do with the DNA they were able to extract, but we just know that so far they haven't been able to tie the DNA to a potential suspect. In 2014, Mr. and Mrs. Dearth gave an interview that I'll link in the show notes. The classified ads for both the Dearth's vehicle and the Bucks TV, the actual ads were shown in that TV episode. And one thing is that the address wasn't listed for the vehicle, just a phone number that you could call and the Dearth's last name. So they thought maybe this person called the house, obtained the address, pretended they were interested in the car, and Linda had to say something like, "Oh, actually, they're not home right now. It's just me home." And that the predator took advantage of the fact that she was home alone. And that's personally what Mr. Dearth believed. At least that's what he indicated in that interview and another interview with the paper. For Mrs. Dearth, she said in a separate news article that she always believed it was someone known to their family. And I should clarify, she had a specific person in mind. She just doesn't name them. And she thinks that either this person had been involved in a sexual act relating to Linda, or that Linda found out about sexual abuse and that this person silenced her. Police are aware of the person Mrs. Dearth suspected, but they haven't commented on who this is and if they've been able to eliminate them. I've talked so much in this episode about the overlapping cases, and because there is very limited information out there in Linda's case, I know it probably seems like I haven't spent enough time on her specifically in this episode. So I want to just wrap up this episode with some thoughts on her family's unique journey navigating their grief, because her parents were young when this happened, but they had to carry this life sentence of losing their daughter and not knowing who did this or why. Just a few months after Linda's murder, the Dearths adopted a 7-year-old girl named Rhonda. Rhonda is actually the biological sister of businessman Michael Haley, who is the husband of politician Nikki Haley. They loved Rhonda dearly, and she helped them begin to heal. But like you so often hear about in these cases, the challenges that come with staying married after a tragedy like this proved to be too much. In the late 70s, the Dearths divorced. They actually both remarried other people. Odine stayed in the family home. She said it made her feel closer to Linda living there. And then, in a weird twist of fate and tragedy, both of the spouses of the Dearths passed away in the 80s unexpectedly. Dwayne and Odine actually reconnected in the 1987 wedding of Rhonda. They were both hesitant to see each other for the first time in almost a decade, but they ended up talking for 6 hours. In the time following, they realized that they still deeply loved each other and that they didn't want the tragedy of what happened to their daughter to get in between what they had together. And so they got remarried with this renewed commitment to work through their grief and continue to pursue answers in Linda's case. They desperately both wanted to find out what happened and get that closure before they died. But tragedy would hit their family once again when Rhonda died unexpectedly of COVID in 2020. Odine passed away the following year at the age of 85, and Dwayne died back in February of 2024 at the age of 88, both of them dying without ever knowing who murdered Linda and why. Jack Buck remarried and had stepchildren in his new relationship, but he never went on to have any more children of his own, and he died in 2008 at just 66 years old. The mystery of who killed Linda Sue and the Buck family in the winter of '73 still lingers. Was it someone posing as a potential buyer for their classified ads? Was it the person who made the obscene phone calls? Was it the person Odine suspected that was connected to their family, someone Linda would have known? While we know DNA evidence was not successful in earlier years, it's unclear what testing has been done recently, and if they have any DNA that could push the case forward. But in the absence of success with physical evidence, investigators are hoping that people who may know something will now come forward with all the time that has passed, and give surviving family members the answers that they so desperately need. If that person is you, you can submit a tip online with the Ohio Attorney General, which I'll share in the show notes. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review on your favorite listening platform and tell a friend. Case suggestions can be made to simplertimecrime.pod@gmail.com. I have a TikTok and Facebook page, but I'm most active on Instagram, which you can find me at simplertimecrimepod. Thank you so much for listening, and join me again next Monday for another new case.